Next on Year by Year, an assassin's bullet changes history. Step back to 1963.
It's coming up on the History Channel. Hear ye, hear ye. Coming up on the History.
Do you remember where you were on November 22nd, 1963? I'm Karen Stone, and this is Year by Year. When an assassin's bullet killed John F. Kennedy as he rode through Dallas in an open car, more than a presidency was shattered. People all over the world experienced the death as a personal loss. 3 months earlier, Martin Luther King had delivered his I Have a Dream speech. After the assassination, Americans wondered whether they'd ever be able to dream again. The newsreels of 1963 captured these agonizing moments and other stories, including the Senate's investigation of organized crime, the questionable kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr., and the historic Civil Rights March on Washington. Now, Year by Year, 1963.
The 88th Congress convenes in Washington for a busy session. There are some new faces on Capitol Hill, and among them are 12 new senators, 9 Democrats and 3 Republicans. They are sworn in by Vice President Lyndon Johnson before taking up their new duties. Abraham Ribicoff gave up his cabinet post to become Connecticut senator, and another new face is Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. Most interest, however, centers around Edward Ted Kennedy, the third brother to achieve success in the national political arena. Congress begins its first session by establishing some sort of record. When called to order by House Speaker McCormick, only 1 senator and 1 representative are absent. One of Washington's most distinguished throngs is at the National Gallery of Art to welcome a distinguished visitor. President and Mrs. Kennedy, with French Cultural Minister André Malraux and his wife, pay homage to the first public appearance of Mona Lisa, the Leonardo da Vinci painting that has captured the fancy of generations for 400 years. The President expresses the gratification of the nation.
Mr. Minister, we in the United States are grateful for this loan from the leading artistic power in the world, France.
Scores of cameramen record the event as the presidential party leads a tribute to the lady who will play host to many, many thousands in the next 3 weeks. The enigmatic smile acts like a magnet to both art lovers and the curious. The next day, the gallery is jammed as the crowd passes by the painting 4 abreast. It is estimated by a curious statistician that each viewer has from 3 to 5 seconds in front of the painting. Some stand in line repeatedly for just one more glimpse of the smile that has launched 1,000 arguments. It's hail and farewell to Alcatraz. The dread rock in San Francisco Bay plays host to the press on its closing day. For the first time in its long penal history, reporters and cameramen are allowed to roam its innermost cell blocks and cells at will. Wearing handcuffs and leg irons, the last 27 of its 1,500 prisoners leave the crumbling, unsalvageable fortress for more modern federal penitentiaries. Under heavy guard, they will be flown to maximum security quarters in Atlanta, Leavenworth, and eventually the new Marion prison in southern Illinois. Maintenance guards will be the only inhabitants of the island until its final disposition is decided by Congress and the state of California. Families of the guards and prison workers who are being transferred to other assignments are probably the only ones who say goodbye to Alcatraz. Chicago's O'Hare Airport, which for some time already has been the world's busiest flying field, is officially dedicated. President Kennedy, in a 3-hour jaunt from Washington, pays tribute to Lieutenant Commander Edward H. O'Hare, the naval aviation hero of World War II, for whom the field is named. 1,000 or more flights come in or out of here each day. Later, a parade through the Loop takes Mr. Kennedy to a civic luncheon. He takes the opportunity to urge Chicagoans to support his $10.3 billion tax cut proposal, without which, he says, the unemployment rate will inevitably keep rising. When the submarine Thresher slid down the ways at Portsmouth, New Hampshire in July of 1960, it was a gala, patriotic affair. The fastest and deepest diving submarine was about to join Uncle Sam's nuclear fleet. A year later, she was commissioned and began a long series of sea trials with a hand-picked crew, the flower of volunteers for the silent service. Last July, the Thresher went into the yards for a shakedown overhaul, and new secret equipment was installed. She then put to sea and successfully went through shallow dives. The next day, a deep dive was scheduled. She'd never serviced. No sooner had the tender Skylark reported something amiss than Navy search teams went into action. There was optimism at first. Maybe her communication equipment was faulty. With the hours, hope waned. At the point where the Thresher submerged, 220 miles east of Boston, rescue craft knew that the sea's depth was 1.5 miles. But the search went on. Many recall the epic of the submarine Squalus in 1939. She went down off New Hampshire, crippled in the midst of a dive. But the Squalus was a different story. A marker was spotted, and the Navy put new rescue techniques into operation. A bell was attached to the sub, and 33 men of the 59-man crew were rescued. The others had been trapped in a flooded bulkhead. The day following the Thresher's fatal dive, search vessels discover oil slicks and debris that confirm the worst fears. It is the duty of Admiral George Anderson, Chief of Naval Operations, to announce the loss that saddens a nation.
I conclude with great regret and sadness that this ship with 129 fine souls aboard is lost.
They rest in the bosom of the sea they loved, heroes who died pushing back the frontiers of man's knowledge.
Year by Year will continue in a moment, here on the History Channel.
Hollywood draws a glittering crowd. The 35th Annual Academy Awards. There's an air of electrified anticipation among the stars, including Angie Dickinson, who is Gregory Peck's new leading lady in Captain Newman, M.D. The first Oscar is announced. The Best Supporting Actor.
And the winner is Ed Begley.
Veteran Ed Begley receives the award for his work in Sweet Bird of Youth. Then the accolade for Best Supporting Actress.
The winner is Patty Duke in The Miracle Worker.
Patty Duke, the most gifted juvenile actress, created a sensation in The Miracle Worker. The men behind the scenes are honored, too, for the best achievement in art direction, Universal's To Kill a Mockingbird. Additional honor heaped on To Kill a Mockingbird as it tops them all as the best screenplay. Now the Oscar for the Best Actress.
And the winner.
Miss Bancroft is on New York stage, and Joan stops for the absent star. The evening moves swiftly to a climax. The best.
Lawrence of Arabia.
It's the second Oscar for Sam Spiegel, who won in 1957. The moment all have waited for, the Best Actor of the Year.
Now, Gregory Peck.
Peck wins his first Oscar. He's before for his outstanding role of the lawyer in Universal's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Thank you, Academy. Thank you, Harper Lee, Alan Pakula, Robert Milligan, Russ Harlan, all of my good associates at the studio. Thank you, members of the press, who have seen columnists across the country who approved of my work and said so. And I want to thank my family, my good close friends, for inspiration and moral support and affection. Thank you.
Prince Rainier III of Monaco arrives in New York with his daughter Caroline. This week visit in the United States. His princess, the former Grace, is arriving on a list with the heir to the throne, their son. Prince Rainier and the former movie star celebrate their 7th wedding anniversary while here. 4 hours later, Princess Grace arrives with Prince Albert. The family is leaving immediately for Philadelphia, Grace's old hometown. They will open a travel exhibit and dedicate a theater at Ravenhill Academy in memory of her. Though a title, Her Highness says she remains a Philadelphia girl at heart. Welcome home. A patient and prayerful crowd watched Peter Square as the cardinals of the Catholic solemn conclave cast their 5th ballot for a successor to Pope John. Puffs of white smoke from a stove in the Sistine Chapel. A pope elected. The burning ballot signal the joyous news. When the word spread through Rome like wildfire, St. Peter's Square was filled with crowds within Rome, rejoicing throughout the world. Inside the Sistine Chapel, one is vacant. The one that was occupied by Giovanni Battista Cardinal Montini. He now is the 261st successor to St. Peter. In papal robes, the new pontiff announces he was the name of Paul VI. He was close to his predecessor, Pope John, and is quick to announce that he will continue his progressive policies. His first public appearance is to impart Orbi et Orbi to the city and to the world. It was the first cardinal created Pope John, and Paul, he is going to continue the Ecumenical Council. Thus, the new spiritual leader of a half-billion Catholics is to make his dynamic force in the manner of Pope John XXIII. They're rolling out the red carpet at the Bonn for the arrival of President Kennedy as he starts a 4-day working visit. He's greeted by Eisenhower on behalf of the nation. Here's a rousing welcome from the thousands out into the airport. He receives honor guard in the traditional manner, and he is also greeted by Chancellor Earhart. Then the trip into Cologne after Adenauer. The route is lined with people, and the square of the cathedral is jammed. It is officially estimated 150,000 greet the president as he arrives to attend mass at the medieval cathedral. This is twice the number that President Charles de Gaulle when he was here to woo Adenauer into the French camp. France has suggested the U.S. might no longer be willing to meet its commitments in Europe. Mr. Kennedy pledged that the U.S. will remain in Europe as long as desired or required. The crowd was conquered by Kennedy and swept through police lines in Cologne and in Bonn, where 50 cheered themselves forth. They shall say as many as 2 million people greeted the president on his first day in Germany. In front of the hall, Mr. Kennedy again brings home his theme. The U.S. will never relax in backing all of Europe. The president's trip is billed as a tribute to the German people. He appears on friends. Millions.
Still to come on Year by Year, the war on organized crime and what was new in 1963. In 1963, Americans were introduced to push-button phones, audio cassette players, and artificial heart operations.
The nation's underworld gets the unwelcome spotlight of publicity as the Senate's Investigation Subcommittee begins new hearings on crime. Arkansas Senator McClelland is at the helm. Attorney General Robert Kennedy paints a grim picture of the rise of lawlessness under the Cosa Nostra, or Mafia. This he describes as the government of organized gambling, narcotics peddling, extortion, racketeering, and controlling of certain trade unions. He says the income runs into billions. These hearings always attract a large number of spectators. This one is particularly crowded, awaiting the first public appearance of Joseph Velaki, the convicted hoodlum whose confessions to the FBI have reportedly put a price of $100,000 on his head by the infuriated mafia. The bikini days are over, and now the interest is in fashions for cold weather, for formal parties and opening nights. A collection by West Berlin designer Heinz Ostergaard emphasizes a long, extended silhouette. A white fox collar is both sensibly warm for wintertime and perky for fun. The difference between just a nice dress and an amusing one can be a little bow placed where nobody would expect it to be. In the words of Herr Ostergaard, brocade costumes peel out of white fox collars like first flowers out of the last snow. That's what he said. Give the designer a play apron, a dirndl, and some French lingerie, and what does he come up with? A dinner gown, of course. There's more than just that touch of mink over this wool Georgette. Salome had 7 veils, but look what they got her. A girl could get ahead much better in far fewer veils. Still more veils. Not very warming, perhaps, but in real life, the girl would wear the dress in a ballroom, not out here. 1963 was a golden year in sports, right from baseball's opening day, when President Kennedy attended the Baltimore-Washington game to throw out the first ball. The baseball season wound up in a blaze of glory. Glory for pitcher Sandy Koufax and his Dodgers, that is. Sandy tamed the mighty Yankee batters in the first game of the World Series and set a new strikeout record as he fanned 15 victims. The Kentucky Derby saw a 9-to-1 shot. Cherokee run the favored Neverbend and other highly rated horses right into the ground. It was a thriller down to the wire. In the Belmont Stakes, Cherokee played the same winning tune as he moves up on the rail to overtake Candy Spots and goes on to win. It's a thriller right out of fiction as Cherokee thunders past Candy Spots and uncorks his great racing form to scoot home an easy winner. As a 3-year-old, this makes 5 out of 6 races. Gay is the word for Cherokee. For the 4th straight time, the mighty Kelso was named Horse of the Year. With earnings well over $1.5 million mark, Kelso could well be the greatest horse of all time. The Toronto Maple Leafs and the Detroit Red Wings went into the 5th game of the Stanley Cup Series tied 2-2. It was Toronto that had the reserve to outskate Detroit, and they brought the trophy back to Canada for the 2nd straight year by a score of 3-1. Loyola and the University of Cincinnati battled into overtime for the collegiate basketball title. It was a seesaw game right up to the final seconds. With the score 58-58, Loyola's Hunter and Rouse team up for the winning basket. Throughout the year of 1963, every sport scored high in action and thrill. A new weapon is installed in the Pentagon, but it's a weapon of peace. This is the teletype that will operate at the U.S. end of an open line to Moscow. This link, it is hoped, will help avoid misunderstandings that could possibly trigger a catastrophe. Now, a president could be in touch with the Russian premier in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, there's another thaw in the Cold War. The Russian ambassador, Anatoly Dobrinin, arrives at the White House with a message from Chairman Khrushchev for President Kennedy. The two men met for 40 minutes, and the ambassador then said that the president will confer with Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko next month on further steps to ease tensions.
Still to come on Year by Year, Martin Luther King Jr. tells us about his dream and the front page news in 1963. The front page news of 1963, civil rights leader Medgar Evers is murdered. The Supreme Court rules that reading the Bible in schools is unconstitutional, and Gordon Cooper orbits the Earth aboard the Faith 7.
Just 100 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves, 100,000 people converge on the nation's capital to rally for civil rights. They come by train, they come by bus and by air. They come from the north, the south, the east and west. They come united in one cause, to urge Congress to pass a civil rights bill to end forever the blight of racial inequity. This great throng with a cause gathers on the mall that stretches from the Washington Monument toward the Capitol. From the break of dawn, they filter into the city. By 9:30, it is estimated that 40,000 had, but it's more like a Sunday outing as they enter groups and discuss the day quietly. They are scheduled to move to the Lincoln Memorial at noon, near the top leaders of the movement. Those at the moment gathering on Capitol Hill with members of Congress, pointing up the end of the rally. By 11, there are more than 200,000 thronging the mall. That is bigger than the most optimistic forecasts. Now there's a growing animation. It seems as if the demonstrators were finding strength in each other, had discovered their cause was a bond. The crowd became impatient to get in, and they moved toward the Lincoln Memorial before the scheduled hour. They move with good humor, laughter, and song. Few realize that they are participants in a historical day. It will become part of the American scene that today's gathering is the largest in Washington's history. The men who organized the rally walk with springing steps toward the speaker stand. On the left, Roy Wilkins with A. Philip Randolph. They have fought their fight all of their adult lives. In the van is Martin Luther King, who has been jailed 12 times for issues. Others on hand include Walter Reuther, head of the auto workers. Authorities were fearful of disorders, and there were 5,000 uniformed men on duty. They had little to do but keep dissident groups away from the rally. Arrests in Washington were below normal. Police attribute this to the fact that for the first time in 30 years, you couldn't even buy a beer in Washington. The civil rights marchers needed no stimulants like that. They provided their own with songs that ranged from the sacred to the hillbilly, but with the one recurring theme, the cause of 20 million Negroes. Assembled around the reflecting pool before the Lincoln Memorial occupies every inch on the lawns and under the trees. And there's a great swell of cheers to welcome Martin Luther King to the speaker's podium, a man who stands as a symbol of all they are fighting for. Later, Mr. King and the other leaders are to go to the White House, where the president said that everyone must be impressed with the demonstration of the throng's faith and confidence in our democratic form of government. However, he warned, there's a long fight ahead in Congress. The theme, the keynote, the thought uppermost in minds of all here today is best set forth by Dr. King. He sums up a day the Capitol will long remember.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Washington, D.C., 1963. Democracy speaks in a mighty voice. The horrifying ordeal of Frank Sinatra Jr. began while he was filling an engagement at Lake Tahoe. He was on the bill at the Hurrah Casino, and there was no shadow of the impending crime as he held the floor at an earlier performance. The young man was following in the footsteps of his father. The eldest Sinatra was the idol of Bobby Soxers in the 30s. While he was fulfilling his engagement at the resort on the California-Nevada state line, young Frank was staying at this motel annex. He was having dinner before one of his shows when his abductors moved in. An FBI padlock seals the door of his room as clues are sought. A trumpet player, John Foss, was with Sinatra when the two armed gunmen spirited him away. Foss was able to give the authorities little help as police set up roadblocks within 15 minutes. The kidnappers, however, slipped the net and drove their victim to Los Angeles 400 miles away. They forced Sinatra to make the trip hidden in the trunk compartment. The eldest Sinatra received 8 phone calls, instructions on ransom, and in the early morning hours, more than 2 days later, was able to announce his son. Young Sinatra had been released a few miles from home. So the gang picked up the rest. He had a long rest at his mother's house after 9 days with little sleep. The University of Alabama campus at Tuscaloosa is under a tight security guard of State Police. Governor George Wallace appeals for calm. Prepares to confront a deputy attorney. The federal officers are armed with a proclamation from President Kennedy urging the governor to end his efforts to prevent Negro students from registering at the university. The governor is adamant. He made a campaign promise to go away himself to prevent the opening of the last all-white state university. After the federal officers leave, there's a several hours while President Kennedy federalizes the Alabama National Guard that he moved to the campus. Henry Graham arrives to tell the governor, "It's my sad duty to step aside on orders of the President of the United States." The governor yields to federal authority, but promises to continue what he terms a constitutional fight. There was no unfairness at any time during this confrontation of state and federal authority. 5 minutes after he leaves, James Hood is the first of his race to become a University of Alabama student. He is followed into the registrar by Vivian Malone. Both the students are 20 years old and will take summer courses.
The morning of November 22nd, 1963, Air One brought President Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline to Dallas. Before that day was over, the course of history would be irrevocably changed. When Year by Year returns, the event of the decade, President John F. Kennedy is assassinated. That November morning in Dallas, when Air Force One touched down at Love Field, President John Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline descended from the plane to the cheers of a crowd that had gathered to greet them. Throughout the day, enthusiastic supporters lined the route of the presidential motorcade. They were there when the president's open limousine turned onto Dealey Plaza, and then shots rang out. The images of President Kennedy's assassination were burned indelibly into our consciousness. The news event of 1963, the youngest elected president in American history, is killed.
page in the annals of America has been written. The crack of an assassin's bullet. A nation mourns, the world grieves. The man who became 35th president less years ago is dead. He led his country boldly through the treacherous shoals of Cold War crises. His firm commitments to support the cause of democracy throughout the world won him acclaim almost unprecedented in the history of the presidency. He faced up to communist threats with such firm shows of force that Khrushchev, back in Cuba, softened the hard red line on Berlin. He brought to the White House the vigor of youth, a family that captivated the hearts of all. No possible shadow loomed over this last group picture of his family, John, Helen, John, and Caroline. Death has closed the cover on album portraits like this. Rendezvous with grim destiny begins a little time as his plane lands in... Earlier, he had received a tumultuous reception in Fort Worth, and now more thousands are waiting to greet him in Dallas. But death is less than 1 hour away. At 1:25, the motorcade moves into the downtown area. Death 6 minutes away. In a warehouse, a sniper with a rifle poised waits. The cheers of the crowd muffle the 3 shots. The assassin's aim is deadly. The area is aswarm with police, rangers, and Secret Service men. The murderer slips the net, but a few blocks away, a man is captured after he is reported to have killed a policeman. That man is a 24-year-old pro-Castro Texan who once sought Soviet citizenship. He is charged with murder. Meanwhile, the president had been rushed to a nearby hospital where life lingered as a world praised. An hour later, he was dead, crushed like his wife's abandoned boot. A shocked nation weeps. Across the country, around the world, disbelief was the first reaction. Then a great outpouring of grief, shock, and revulsion. A proud banner is lowered. The empty is a symbol of this mockery of American ideals and freedom. Peoples of all faiths in prayer for the first Catholic to become president. The United Nations General Assembly joins in a minute of silent tribute to the man who fought so hard and valiantly for the ideals of this international body. The Iron Curtain was dissolved in the sincerity of their sorrow. As always, democracy finds its strength in the continuity of the presidency. Lyndon B. Johnson becomes the 36th president of the United States, just 99 minutes after his predecessor's life had ebbed away. The widow, with stamina born of courage, stands bravely by the new president. Mr. Johnson accompanies the martyred president's body back to the Capitol, a Capitol still paralyzed by shock. Sad tasks are ahead. It is arranged that the president's body will first lie in repose at the White House. Then it will be moved to the rotunda of the Capitol for public homage. The president's body is met by a cordon of servicemen. They represent all the armed forces in honoring their commander-in-chief. The widow, on the arm of her brother-in-law, remains a towering figure of fortitude through her long ordeal. Steadfast in death as in life, she accompanies her beloved on his lonely ride. Then President Johnson and the First Lady leave the plane. Now the Texan, who has devoted his life to an energetic public career, faces the burdens of office in days of foreign and domestic crises to keep burning the torch that has inspired a free world. With humility, the President of the United States harks to the future.
Yes,
is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask help and God.
In some men, the presidency has bred greatness. They have become giants, forged capable of courage. Now begins a new chapter in the history of a nation grown great under the inspired leadership of great men. President Johnson faces his tasks with a sense of integrity that is unquestioned, with knowledge that breeds respect, and with hope that God will guide his hand. Far into as president, he faces his awesome future unflinchingly. The light of reason won't be dimmed by a rifle shot. May God, in his wisdom, help President Johnson keep it shining brightly. Madness and hate erupt anew in Dallas as President Kennedy's accused assassin is shot down himself during a jail transfer. There's an ominous symbol in Lee Harvey Oswald's murder weapon as he is taken to the city basement where an armored car is to move him to a maximum security cell. Oswald walks his last mile. His assailant moves in.
There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
Now, from another camera, is slowed. The murderer moves, and here is the shame of all America as Jack Rubenstein takes the law unto himself. Dying Oswald is rushed to the same hospital where Kennedy died. Doctors work to save his life. But 48 hours after the president's death, his accused leader is dead. The sound of the muffled drum sweeps in melancholy waves over the hushed throng. A hush broken only by a stifled sob, a murmur. A whole people lifted up in common sorrow and humbled in their hearts. Down this avenue of sadness, they bring President John F. Kennedy, martyred hero, to lie in state under the great dome of the... Mrs. Kennedy begins the long hours of her public grief, courageous dignity that has marked each moment of her ordeal. Caroline and John seem to mirror their mother's poise. With President Johnson and Kennedy, she is in the van of the mourners who will pay their respects. Historic Rotunda. President Johnson represents a sorrowing people, as is the wreath marked from President Johnson and the nation. Mrs. Kennedy comes forward with Caroline, a tableau that calls for words. Its poignancy calls only for tears. Bearing the burden's own sorrow, 250,000 people braved near freezing weather by the dead president in tribute. Some waited for as long as 12 hours, and at a time stretched for 10 miles. The old, the young, the aged, the children. They became one in their grief, in the spontaneous outpouring that throws up an memorial to the American spirit. And so they kept their vigil through the long and lonely night, each man a tiny island of sadness, buffeted by the seas of unhappy fate. The next day, the body is borne to St. Matthew's Cathedral, with Mrs. Kennedy and the President's family walking in humble prayer behind the caisson. Not since the funeral of Britain's King Edward VII in 1910 has there been such a gathering of kings and queens, presidents and premiers. 220 dignitaries from 92 foreign lands, warriors who died working for peace, liberty, and the dignity of erect and proud. Mrs. Kennedy walks the 6 long blocks with firm step yet tearful eye. At the cathedral, a pontifical funeral mass is to be said for the repose of the soul of the first Roman Catholic president, from a devout family, who today find deep solace in the rites of their church. As the distinguished mourners gather in St. Matthew's, peoples of all faiths around the world join them. Mass is read in Moscow, Buddhists in South Vietnam, Shinto priests conduct services in Tokyo. A rabbi exhorts God in... The foreign dignitaries move unobtrusively to their pews. They attach little importance to their own identities today, joining the humble in the 4 corners of the earth, each in his own way, that the soaring spirit that was President Kennedy in life may find eternity in death. The strains of the Ave Maria reach out like a... Mrs. Kennedy recalled. The Ave Maria was sung at her wedding. After the sacrifice of the Mass, there are prayers aloud in the tongue of old faiths. In the solemn moment, when the incense is tossed on hot coals, and Cardinal Cushing, an old family, blesses the mortal remains of John F. Kennedy. From St. Matthew's, the cortege is to cross the Potomac to the cemetery of Arlington. As the casket is returned down, there comes a family vignette that must take place with those memories we hold warm and dear. A gentle reminder from his mother, and John celebrates his 3rd birthday with a soldier's farewell to his father. No finer epitaph could be extended President Kennedy than his own words from the speech he was to deliver in Dallas the day of his assassination. We in this generation are by destiny rather the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. We ask that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve our time and for all time ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our must always underlie our strength. The world will remember those words of President Kennedy and his inaugural plea. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. The Irish Honor Guard with a flourish of arms, and the precious banner that was the President's shroud for 3 days is folded smartly for presentation to Mrs. Kennedy. An eternal flame is lighted before the grave by Mrs. Kennedy, the first such memorial to burn in Arlington Cemetery. She is followed by the President's brothers, Robert and Edward. Thus, the American people have buried their beloved. May his soul find comfort in knowing they walked with greatness. And may the soul of John Fitzgerald Kennedy rest.
1963 was a year of milestones in the civil rights movement. South Carolina, the last state to maintain segregation, finally opened its colleges to students. And Martin Luther King delivered a speech that would inspire the nation for years to come. The powerful image of a widow kneeling with her children overshadowed all others in 1963. In a matter of seconds in Dallas, a woman lost her husband, 2 children lost their father, and a nation lost its idealism. The American century had ended, and the world would never be so young again. This has been Year by Year. I'm Karen for the History Channel.
Stay tuned for the headlines and happenings of 1965, next as our year-by-year marathon continues.